Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 137 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, I want to share with you why taking a look at your system before starting a biologic medication like Dupixent is so important. The reason I say this is because biologic drugs essentially block certain inflammatory pathways that can drive eczema, and there are certainly other types that are used for psoriasis. But isn't it a good thing to block inflammation? Well, yes and no. It's good to stop symptoms that are driving you nuts, especially given that there is an inflammatory component to many skin rash conditions. But it could also be a bad thing that you're shutting down a natural alarm system, so to speak, that your body uses to tell you that something's gone wrong. Without it working, things can possibly go awry, and that's why it's imperative to fully assess your body and its biochemical symptoms ahead of time. To illustrate my point, I'm going to share a client case with you to give you some real-life insight. One point that I want to make here is that this isn't about whether or not you should use Dupixent or any other biologic medication if it's been prescribed by your doctor. That is a very personal decision only you can make. And there is a time and a place for medication. Instead, I'd like to focus this conversation to help you understand why it might be better to do a thorough check of your system first to see if there are some areas in need of some TLC before you dive in. The first thing I want to do is explain the significance of inflammation and symptoms in general, at least from my perspective as a clinical nutritionist. A lot of people find symptoms like what many of us with chronic skin issues have experienced to be incredibly annoying, embarrassing, frustrating, depressing, and even angering. But here's the thing. Symptoms aren't meant to mentally and emotionally devastate you. That outlook puts you at war with your body. It makes you think that your body is out to get you, and it makes you feel cursed and even damned. But that's not what's going on, I promise you. After my own health experiences and training, I now realize that symptoms are your body's way of communicating with you. I've talked about this on other podcasts before. I wish my body would just spit out a tape that said exactly what was wrong, but it doesn't work that way. Instead, the symptoms can be all over the place and sometimes vague and, unfortunately, easy to ignore until you no longer can because of how uncomfortable you are. Think of symptoms as something similar to the check engine light in your car. Frankly, I never know what the heck is really wrong with my car when it pops on. It's very vague. And to some degree, without the help of my mechanic, who has these instruments that allow him to look at the diagnostic systems and whatnot, he's able to figure out the issue. But on my end, I just see a light pop on, and I recognize that something needs to be done. But what would be the consequence if I just went to the mechanic and asked him to cut the power to the check engine light without first evaluating the car's system? Well, I could end up stranded by the side of the road one day because something in the engine breaks and didn't get the attention it needed beforehand. That's why I believe that your body uses symptoms as a way to tell you that something needs attention under the surface. That's why viewing your symptoms, and when I say symptoms, I mean all of the symptoms that make up your experience of dealing and living with skin rash conditions, they're really a communication tool that makes a lot more sense when you look at it that way. It's also a lot more empowering to know that your body isn't actually working against you just to make your life difficult. It's trying to tell you something. To demonstrate what I mean by all of this, I figured I'd share one of my cases from my private practice with you. My client Jessica gave me permission to share her journey to give you guys hope, but also to serve as an eye-opener of why looking deeper is so important. Jessica came into my practice with severe eczema. She'd had it as a kid, but it eventually died down, only to return with a vengeance in 2017. She'd seen multiple dermatologists and tried a lot of different approaches, including the elimination of gluten, dairy, and eggs from her diet, without any real improvement. Jessica shared with me that a year ago, her skin was so horrifically bad, and those are her words, that she had to take a week off from work. She felt like she'd lost all of that last year. Because she wasn't getting stable improvements with steroid creams, her doctor had finally recommended Dupixent. She had already filled the prescription, but was hesitant and wondered if she should see if something else was going on. And that's when she came across skinterrupt.com and my practice. Rather than just thinking that Jessica had a skin problem, I dug a lot deeper. I found that she had thyroid problems that were triggered after her first child was born, easily breakable nails, rashes in different areas of her body, some of which were in areas like her armpits that made me wonder if yeast was possibly an issue, daily fatigue, dry scalp, dry eyes, and migraines. Additionally, I reviewed her labs for the past few years and determined that some nutrients in her system were really suboptimal. One example was her vitamin B12 level, which had been steadily dropping for a couple of years. Other nutrients like her vitamin D, vitamin A, and magnesium were suboptimal, while a nonspecific inflammatory marker called C-reactive protein was high. And her doctor was keeping an eye on her lipid panel because her cholesterol, LDL, which is also known to some people as the bad cholesterol, and triglycerides were all high. Other functional testing done helped us to determine that there was an imbalance of her gut microbiome, which could have been driving some of that inflammation. I worked with Jessica to develop a doable plan to address these issues with diet tweaks, which I had specifically advised her to remove fermented foods for a period of time because of some of the test results, rebalancing her gut bug community, appropriate supplementation to get critical nutrients into her system, and stress management techniques to keep her system out of fight or flight mode. Before I share with you the changes that Jessica experienced, I want to be clear in stating that this was not an overnight journey. A lot of people look for the next one thing to fix them, only to be disappointed. Chronic skin issues often hide several problems under the surface from my experience as a clinical nutritionist, and that's why I always remind you that it's not typically just one problem. There are usually 3 to 5 different root causes that must be addressed and that also often take time. It took time to get where you are now, and so it takes time to unwind many of these issues. With that said, over several months, her skin began to change for the better. Jessica went on a trip to Hawaii and was able to be out in the sun with her family and enjoy the trip. This was in stark contrast to the previous summer of 2018, where she couldn't even go out in the sun because of how bad her skin was. Exercise and sweating weren't triggering flares anymore. And after working together for several months, she had gone from using topical steroids for periods of 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off to only needing some help from Elidol only a couple of days over the course of an entire month. This was, in her eyes, a huge improvement. And we were able to support her lipid panel and many other nutrient markers to come back into appropriate optimal ranges. To this day, Dupixent has stayed on the shelf of Jessica's fridge. She was never opposed to using it, but it was important to her that she didn't miss anything before going that route. She shared with me several times on her journey that if she had just taken the Dupixent, assuming it cleared up her skin, she would have never known about any of the other issues hiding under the surface. Just as one example, her B12 level had been steadily dropping, and she was glad to get that rectified because B12 deficiency can have some very unpleasant symptoms, some of which are permanent, like nerve damage in the extremities. So is Jessica 100% better? No. There are certainly little issues that pop up for her here and there, but overall, her quality of life has dramatically improved. She's cut back on the amount of any topical medications that she's needed, only using them if she gets a flare and they quickly dissipate. And she's able to be outside in the sun, exercising, sweating, enjoying life once again without having to worry that there are other things lurking under the surface that she's just not aware of. I asked Jessica if she had anything specific that she wanted me to share with you on your journey. She wants you to know that, quote, it is a journey to find what are the root causes of your skin issues. The quick fixes, like topical steroids, are just a Band-Aid that help with the symptom. Be patient along the way and realize your healing journey is not going to be linear, end quote. I hope this episode gives you some much-needed insight about what to consider before diving straight into using biologic medications. If you were to just take away one thing from this entire episode, I would hope that it would be to do a really comprehensive check of your system and your health before starting a medication like this. That way, problems lurking under the surface that aren't yet causing major issues don't hopefully turn into big issues. Ultimately, the choice to use or not use biologic medications is incredibly personal and should be made after extensive conversations with your doctor and familiarizing yourself with the potential side effects that could pop up. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions on this particular episode. Head on over to skinterrupt.com/137 to leave your thoughts there so we can keep the conversation going. Because there's such a push to try biologics when steroid creams don't seem to work well enough or effectively anymore, I feel like this message is critical to hear, since looking deeper isn't a part of the conventional process. So make sure to share this episode with people in our community who are thinking about taking the biologic plunge so that they have the opportunity to take a really in-depth look at their health and their body's systems ahead of time. And last but not least, you know that I deeply appreciate your support of this show. That's why it's so important that if you haven't done so yet, take a moment to rate and review the Healthy Skin Show. Then head on over to your podcast platform of choice and subscribe to the show. That way the next episode lands on your mobile device. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.